When notorious liberal student debater Emily Carter stepped onto the stage, she believed her fierce ideology would silence every opposing voice. She had no idea Barron Trump was about to deliver the most devastating reality check of her life. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The prestigious debate forum had drawn the brightest young minds from universities across America. Throughout the day, passionate discussions had fired up the auditorium, but no one could have predicted what was about to unfold during the open debate session, where any student could take the stage and others could rise to challenge them. The atmosphere was charged with intellectual energy when Emily Carter, known for her aggressive debating style, confidently strode to the podium. Her purple hair matched her fierce demeanor as she adjusted the microphone, a slight smirk playing on her lips. "Fellow students," she began, her voice clear and commanding, "we're here to discuss progress. But there's an elephant in the room we need to address. The suffocating grip of outdated generations on our nation's future." The room grew silent. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "Look around," Emily continued, her voice growing bolder. "While we struggle with modern challenges, people over 50 still control our destiny. These traditionalists cling to their obsolete values, their precious faith, their so-called patriotism, their rigid family structures." Scattered applause erupted, encouraging her to push further. In the third row, a tall, well-dressed young man sat motionless, his expression unreadable. Few recognized him as Barron Trump, who had been quietly observing the debates all day. "These people," Emily's voice dripped with disdain, "these boomers who can barely use a smartphone somehow still decide our future. They've had their time. It's time to admit that their generation is holding us back from true progress." The applause grew louder, drowning out the few murmurs of dissent. Emily's eyes blazed with triumph as she prepared to deliver her most controversial point yet. "What we need," Emily declared, her voice rising with conviction, "is an age limit on political participation. Why should someone who won't live to see the consequences of their choices have any say in our future?" The crowd's reaction intensified. Many students were now standing cheering her on. These people with their obsession with God and guns, their Make America Great Again nostalgia. She made air quotes with her fingers. "They're dinosaurs. Their America is dead, and it's time we buried it." The applause was thunderous now. Emily was feeding off the energy, growing bolder with each statement. "Their values," she scoffed. "Family values, traditional values. These are just code words for resistance to progress. These people built their wealth on privilege and oppression, and now they lecture us about morality." In the third row, Barron Trump remained still, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Around him, students were nodding enthusiastically, some even shouting words of agreement. "I propose," Emily's voice cut through the noise, "that we start a movement to restrict voting rights and public office positions to those under 50. Let's face it, they had their chance. They messed it up. Now it's our turn." The professor moderating the debate, Dr. Harrison, stepped forward, his expression concerned. "Does anyone wish to present a counter-argument?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. Emily crossed her arms, satisfaction evident on her face. The room began to quiet, students looking around wondering if anyone would dare challenge such a powerful presentation. "Anyone?" Dr. Harrison asked again, already reaching for his papers to move on. That's when a deep, clear voice cut through the silence. "I would." The room fell dead silent. All heads turned toward the source of the voice. Emily's smirk widened as Barron Trump rose from his seat. "Well, well," she drawled into the microphone. "Look who decided to grace us with his opinion. Daddy's boy himself." Scattered laughter rippled through the audience. But Barron's composed demeanor didn't waver as he made his way to the podium. His tall frame and impeccable suit cut a striking figure against the casual atmosphere of the debate hall. Emily stepped aside, making an exaggerated sweeping gesture toward the microphone. "Go ahead, Donald's pet," she sneered. "Defend your boomer buddies. This should be entertaining." Barron adjusted the microphone, his movements unhurried and deliberate. The audience held its breath, many expecting him to falter under Emily's notorious debate tactics. Instead, he smiled slightly. Not a smirk, but a genuine, almost sympathetic expression. "Thank you for your passionate presentation, Emily," he began, his voice steady and measured. "But passion without wisdom is like a ship without a rudder. Powerful, but dangerous." Emily's smile flickered for a moment. She hadn't expected this calm, articulate approach. "You speak of progress," Barron continued. "But true progress isn't built by tearing down those who came before us. It's built on their shoulders." He paused, letting his words sink in. "When you say someone over 50 shouldn't have a voice in our future, do you realize you're talking about the very people who created the technology you used to research your arguments?" Emily started to interrupt, but Barron held up a hand, his voice never losing its respectful tone. "Please, you had your turn." I listened carefully to every word. The audience stirred. They weren't used to seeing Emily checked so gracefully. "Now," Barron's voice took on a deeper resonance. "Let's talk about what real progress looks like. You mentioned smartphones," Barron began, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Did you know that many of the key innovations in your iPhone were developed by people who are now in their 60s and 70s? The same boomers you want to silence." Emily rolled her eyes. "That's ancient history." "Speaking of history," Barron smoothly interjected, "let's talk about your claim that their America is dead." His voice took on an edge of steel beneath its polite exterior. "The America they built provides the very platform you're using to attack them. The universities where we study. Built by them? The prosperity that allows us to spend our time debating instead of struggling to survive. Created by them? The freedom to speak your mind without fear. Protected by them." The audience's attention was now fully focused on Barron. Even some of Emily's most vocal supporters were nodding thoughtfully. "But they don't understand modern problems," Emily shot back, her voice rising with frustration. "Really?" Barron raised an eyebrow. "The generation that lived through the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, multiple economic crises, and the birth of the digital age doesn't understand complex problems." He paused for effect. "They solved problems we haven't even learned about yet." Emily's face flushed. "But their values..." "Their values?" Barron's voice carried a quiet intensity. "You mean like hard work, personal responsibility, and respect for others? The same values that built the greatest nation on earth." He gestured to the room. "Look around you. Everything in this room, From the chairs you're sitting on to the democratic system that allows us to have this debate was built by people who held those values. The crowd murmured, several students exchanging glances. Emily's supporters were growing noticeably quieter. But here's what truly concerns me, Barron continued, his gaze sweeping the room. In the name of progress, you're advocating for the most regressive policy imaginable. Discrimination based on age. Isn't it ironic that while claiming to fight for inclusion, you're calling for the exclusion of millions of American citizens? Emily's composure was visibly cracking. She hadn't expected this level of articulate opposition. "Let me make it even simpler," Barron said, his confidence growing with each word. "Let's look at some of these outdated people you want to silence. Elon Musk, over 50. Bill Gates, over 60. The scientists working on cancer cures, many over 50. The professors who teach us most, over 50. My father, 78. He paused, letting each example land. Should we dismiss their contributions because of their age? Oh, how touching! Emily's voice dripped with sarcasm. The privileged heir lectures us about innovation and hard work. She turned to the audience with a theatrical gesture. Notice how he conveniently mentions billionaires. The elite 1% that hoard wealth while regular Americans struggle. Several students nodded vigorously. Emily was regaining her confidence. "And since you brought up your father," she sneered, "let's talk about the values you're so proud of. The values that divide families, that tell people who they can and can't love, that force outdated religious beliefs down our throats." "Interesting," Barron interjected calmly. "How you claim to champion diversity while mocking people's faith because their faith oppresses others." Emily shot back, her voice rising. "Their traditional values are just tools of control. And you," she pointed accusingly at Barron, "you're just another trust fund baby defending a system that keeps you on top." The crowd was energized again, many students cheering Emily's attack. But Barron's composed smile never wavered. "Let's examine that claim," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You say they're tools of control, yet these same values taught millions to fight for civil rights, to help their neighbors, to build communities. My trust fund, I've been volunteering at veteran shelters since I was 14. How many hours have you spent helping others, Emily?" The room fell silent. Emily's triumphant expression flickered. "But that's not—" she started. "Not what you meant," Barron finished. "It never is it? When facts don't match your narrative, you switch to personal attacks. Classic tactic of someone losing an argument. Don't you dare!" Emily's voice cracked with rage. She stormed towards the podium, purple hair wild, finger jabbing the air. "You think you can come here with your suit and your manners and your privilege, lecturing us about values?" The room crackled with tension. Some students were standing now, feeding off Emily's anger. "You want to talk about helping others?" She practically spat the words. "Your family represents everything wrong with this country. The elite, the privileged, hiding behind traditional values, while real Americans suffer." She turned to the crowd, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "Look at him standing there like he belongs here, defending the very system that keeps us down. You know what?" She spun back to Barron, her face contorted with fury. "This freak doesn't deserve to be here." The words echoed through the suddenly silent room. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, clearly alarmed. But Barron raised a hand. "It's okay, Professor," he said quietly, his composure unshaken. Then, turning to Emily with an almost sympathetic smile, "You know what's interesting, Emily? When facts fail you, you resort to shouting. When logic fails you, you turn to insults. When reason fails..." He paused, letting the moment hang. "You show everyone exactly who you really are." Emily's face flushed deep red. "I'm showing everyone the truth about people like you." "No!" ! Barron's voice was firm but gentle. "You're showing everyone what happens when hatred masquerades as progress. You claim to fight discrimination while discriminating. You preach tolerance while showing none. You demand respect while disrespecting millions of Americans who built this country." The audience was completely still now, hanging on every word. "But let me tell you what I see here," Barron continued, his voice carrying a quiet strength that commanded attention. "I see someone so consumed by ideology that she's forgotten a basic truth. Every generation stands on the shoulders of those who came before." Emily tried to interrupt, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "You're twisting my..." "I'm quoting you directly," Barron replied smoothly. "You called our elders dinosaurs. You mocked their faith. You ridiculed their sacrifices. And why? Because they don't share your worldview? That's not progressive. That's prejudice." He turned to address the entire room. "You all just witnessed something remarkable. You saw someone claim to champion diversity while attacking diversity of thought. Someone demanding inclusion while calling for the exclusion of millions. Someone preaching tolerance while showing absolute intolerance for different beliefs." Emily's face had lost all color now. Her supporters were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "But here's the most ironic part," Barron continued, his voice taking on a tone of genuine concern. "While you stand here demanding that we silence our elders, you're benefiting from their legacy. The very platform you're using to attack them, built by them. The freedoms you're exercising, protected by them. The education you're receiving, made possible by them." He paused, letting his words sink in. The silence in the room was deafening. "So tell me, Emily," Barron's voice was almost gentle now, "in your vision of progress, is there room for anyone who disagrees with you? Or is diversity only acceptable when it fits your narrative?" Emily opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time since the debate began, no words came out. "But here's what I find most interesting," Barron said, his voice carrying both authority and compassion. "While you claim to fight for the future, you're repeating the oldest mistake in history, believing that wisdom only belongs to one group." Emily's fierce demeanor was cracking. Her hands gripped the podium, knuckles white. "You see," Barron continued, "true progress isn't about silencing voices. It's about learning from them. Every generation thinks they know better than the last, and every generation eventually realizes how much they had to learn." The room was completely still. Students who had been cheering Emily's attacks now sat and thought. Thoughtful silence. "Those boomers you mock." His voice grew softer, yet somehow more powerful. "They were once young idealists too. They fought for civil rights, questioned authority, demanded change. But they learned something valuable along the way. That lasting progress comes from building bridges, not burning them." Emily's shoulders slumped slightly. The fire in her eyes was flickering out, replaced by something else. The first glimmer of understanding. "So here's my suggestion," Barron said, his voice gentle but firm. Instead of trying to silence the voices of experience, why don't we try listening to them? You might be surprised by how much they understand about change. After all, they've lived through more of it than we have. With quiet dignity, he stepped back from the podium and returned to his seat, leaving Emily standing alone with the weight of his words. After Barron's powerful conclusion, Emily quietly returned to her seat. The debates continued, though the energy in the room had noticeably shifted. Students who spoke after seemed more measured, more thoughtful in their approaches. Nearly an hour later, as Dr. Harrison was about to close the session, Emily's hand rose tentatively into the air. "Yes, Miss Carter," the professor asked, clearly concerned about reopening the earlier conflict. May I speak one more time?" Her voice was barely audible, nothing like her earlier confident tone. Several students exchanged worried glances. Dr. Harrison hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Briefly, please." Emily walked to the podium, her steps uncertain. Gone was the fierce debater who had commanded the stage earlier. This was someone different, someone who had been profoundly shaken. "I need to say something," she began, her voice trembling. "Earlier today, I stood here full of arrogance, attacking the very foundations of our society and disrespecting millions of Americans who built everything we have. I was wrong." She took a shaky breath. "I never imagined that Barron Trump would be the one to show me what true wisdom looks like. That someone I was ready to dismiss would teach me about real inclusivity and compassion. I'm sorry to everyone I offended, to the generations I disrespected. I was blind, and today my eyes were opened." Without waiting for a response, she quickly left the podium and slipped out of the auditorium. Later that evening, as students were filing out of the building, Emily spotted Barron gathering his things. Her heart pounding, she approached him hesitantly, expecting to be met with the same disdain she had shown him earlier. "Barron!" Her voice was small, uncertain. Could I talk to you for a moment?" He turned to her, surprised. His face held no trace of anger or resentment. Instead, he smiled warmly. "Of course. I just wanted to say..." She struggled to find the right words. "I'm so sorry for everything I said, for how I acted." "You know what's interesting about being our age?" Barron replied thoughtfully. "We're old enough to have strong convictions, but young enough to sometimes let those convictions blind us. It's actually pretty normal to get caught up in ideologies and passionate beliefs. That's exactly why the wisdom of older generations is so valuable. They've been exactly where we are." Emily stared at him, taken aback by his compassion. "How are you so wise about all this?" "I've had good teachers," he smiled. "People who taught me that true strength isn't about winning arguments. It's about building understanding. Our elders have seen these same battles, felt these same certainties, and learned these same lessons. We don't have to agree with everyone, but we do need to respect their journey." Overwhelmed by his kindness, Emily suddenly stepped forward and hugged him. For a moment, Barron seemed surprised, but then returned the embrace with gentle understanding. As they parted, both knew that this wasn't just about winning or losing a debate. It was about something far more important. The moment when wisdom overcame pride and understanding conquered division. And if you enjoyed the story, make sure to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales that celebrate the values that make America great. Thanks for watching. God bless you and God bless America. Resentment. Instead, he smiled warmly. Of course. I just wanted to say... She struggled to find the right words. I'm so sorry for everything I said, for how I acted. You know what's interesting about being our age? Barron replied thoughtfully. We're old enough to have strong convictions, but young enough to sometimes let those convictions blind us. It's actually pretty normal to get caught up in ideologies and passionate beliefs. That's exactly why the wisdom of older generations is so valuable. They've been exactly where we are. Emily stared at him, taken aback by his compassion. How are you so wise about all this? I've had good teachers, he smiled. People who taught me that true strength isn't about winning arguments, it's about building understanding. Our elders have seen these same battles, felt these same certainties, and learned these same lessons. We don't have to agree with everyone, but we do need to respect their journey. Overwhelmed by his kindness, Emily suddenly stepped forward and hugged him. For a moment, Barron seemed surprised, but then returned the embrace with gentle understanding. As they parted, both knew that this wasn't just about winning or losing a debate. It was about something far more important. The moment when wisdom overcame pride and understanding conquered division. And if you enjoyed the story, make sure to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales that celebrate the values that make America great. Thanks for watching. God bless you and God bless America. What did you think about Barron's response to Emily's apology? Do you think she truly learned a lesson? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.